2. Programs or services. All communities experience violence and abuse within families or the wider community. When a civil society organization arrives to work with a community, the organization itself can exacerbate existing patterns of harm and abuse, or indeed bring new forms of harm. Abuse and harm caused by civil society organizations can be categorized as neglect, physical or emotional harm, or sexual abuse, or can come in the form of harassment. Harm and abuse caused by the organization typically includes 1. Abuse perpetrated by staff or people contracted by the organization. 2. Programs or services which may exacerbate existing or cause new harm within families or communities. For example, tensions may be caused if it is not clear why certain members of the community are receiving goods or services whilst others are not. 3. Communications and media which can bring new and unwanted attention to the community or to individuals within the community, particularly when a story about an individual shares their personal details or stories reinforce negative stereotypes. Sexual harassment or other forms of harassment within the workplace that is experienced by staff or volunteers is now also considered within the scope and definition of safeguarding. To protect people from sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, and other harm and abuse caused by civil society organizations, many organizations are putting in place measures to prevent and respond to these abuses. Some organizations refer to these measures as protection from sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, or SEAH. Others refer to the measures as safeguarding. Safeguarding measures concentrate on 3 core areas: prevention, reporting, and response. Prevention activities include creating safe workplaces through fostering an organizational culture which promotes diversity and challenges inequality. Ensuring that there are policies, procedures, and a code of conduct in place. Making sure that references are received for all successful candidates during recruitment. Making sure that all staff know what sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment is, and that they behave appropriately at all times. And finally, preventing abuses by civil society organization programs or communications means working closely with the community members to make those programs safe and give consent for communication activities. Reporting makes sure that all organizations have a system so that staff and anyone who interacts with the organization can report an abuse or a suspicion in a safe and confidential way. It is important to have various means to make a report so that people of different ages, genders, nationalities,
Just in the video and then I'm going.
So, phone lines, in-person help desk discussions, and emails are some examples. Organizations also have a duty of care to receive reports that concern harm and abuse within families or communities that are not caused by the organization. However, the response to these differs from the response taken when it is the organization involved in the abuse. Response means making sure that all reports are handled in a way that is appropriate, confidential, and in line with procedures. Where immediate support is needed for the survivor, for example, urgent medical care, links to the nearby social services should be made, and independent investigations should be conducted where necessary. Cases or concerns which relate to harm and abuse within families and communities must be referred to community organizations, support services, or authorities where it is safe to do so. Safeguarding communities and staff within the organization helps to ensure that the organization delivers good quality work and creates a workplace which is productive and enables everyone to reach their full potential.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Good afternoon once more, and thank you to everyone who's just joined us. I'm going to now allow our speakers to introduce themselves, and then we will then start with our first speaker. So Leslie Ann, if you could please introduce yourself. Les, please unmute your mic. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Hi, everybody. I'm Leslie Ann van Salm, and I'm the founder and managing director of 24-year-old nonprofit organization, Kalisa Social Solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Les. Esli, over to you.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Esli Kakana. I'm currently the OD and talent manager at Parent.
Thank you, Esli. And finally, Karen, over to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Karen Walker-Simpson. I'm the director of the Funder Safeguarding Collaborative, which is a new network of grant-making organisations who want to make a positive contribution to keeping people safe.
Thank you so much, Karen. And without wasting any more time, Leslie Ann, I'll hand over to you.
Hello, everybody.
Yes, we can hear you, Les.
Okay. And sorry, I'm working off my phone, and my phone's shown that the video is gone. Is that not the case? Are you able to still see me?
Your video is gone, so if you could please switch it on.
All right, sure. Please just bear with me for a minute.
We see you. Thank you, Les. You can go ahead.
All right, thank you. All right, hi everybody. So I'm going to just share with you a little bit about why we value and appreciate the support of Comic Relief and Afrika Tikkun in terms of our safeguarding, because we've experienced so many horrendous experiences in the past in the absence of policies. I'm going to share a few of them with you, just for us to appreciate how valuable it is to actually have policies and procedures in place. So Kalisa started off 24 years ago working in correctional centers. In fact, we pioneered the first offender rehabilitation program in our country. And the emphasis was actually, our intervention was around storytelling. And when we started listening to the stories of these 24 most beautiful, gorgeous young men, we realized that these young people are actually a product of a society where they cannot be blamed for their dysfunctionality. Being brought up in homes where there are no norms, where there's no rules, where there are no boundaries, they assumed a life of their own and ended up looking for attention and unfortunately in prison. And we, through that intervention, actually developed a philosophy that Khaleesa lives by, according to this day, is don't ask somebody what they did, but what happened to them. And I believe that what happens to people, if not guided by effective policies and procedures, unfortunately does lead to a lot of unsafe non-guarding. So the word reintegration had never entered my head, because at that time we were running a marketing company, and working with offenders was just part of a pilot program. When the offenders that we were working with started coming out, because Khaleesa was their safeguard place to go to, we had to start looking for opportunities for them to gain employment, because obviously we knew that the relapse rate was so very high. And we trained them in motivational speaking, industrial theatre, and also try to find employment for them through one very well-known employment agency. Ironically, those 6 offenders who were employed through the employment agency to this day are still gainfully employed, have never relapsed, and have never been reported in terms of bad behavior. And that was obviously because under these circumstances, are being transparent about their fragility and the need for them to be mentored and safeguarded within their work environments, created a wonderful opportunity for them to flourish. And as opposed to those who joined Khaleesa without our really understanding how to deal with the risks that these young people had been exposed to, we plunged them back into a world of no boundaries. And of course, from a penal institution where there was such strict environmental rules and so many policies in place that they had to abide to, they had no choice, we found ourselves hugely at risk. We had offenders who were fired from part-time jobs due to fraternizing with women. We had multiple thefts. We had several of them that boycotted our organization, that wrote bad media stories about us. And then our turning point was when we took 10 of them to London. And even though we had a code of conduct in place, we never realized what risk we were placing these very vulnerable young men and women at by taking them to a foreign country and letting them go free, except for the time they had to work with us doing dramas and storytelling. And we ended up by only returning with 6 of them and the rest of them staying behind because they were too drunk to enter onto the airplane. And that was really when we had to really take a good deep look at ourselves and say, we're doing something very wrong. We're actually doing a huge injustice as opposed to a huge favor to these young people who had been so disadvantaged throughout their lives. And Khaleesa then changed its name from Khaleesa Crime Prevention Initiative to Khaleesa Social Solutions. We're very grateful that for the past 18 years, we have had a lot of policy enforcement in our organization through receiving funding from the Department of Social Development for our diversion programs. And these programs are run in a statutory context. And we have so many reporting requirements and so much penalty enforced on us if we don't comply. And that's that really started our organization to start realizing how important it is for policy reporting and amendment and review and collaboration with staff in terms of, is it working, isn't it working? And most importantly, to also understand that everything we do had to be a co-creation, because enforcing a rule on somebody when they themselves might not agree with it or might have a different context to add is extremely important. And then came along Streetscapes. My colleague Yessie of 20 years, 5 years ago, decided that she would like to set up a project that would look at supporting people who had been living on the streets. And we know that that people on the streets have their own set of huge vulnerabilities that need to be tackled with. And it's through this lens of vulnerability that we really have embraced the support that Comic Relief and Afrika Tikkun have brought to us. So our homeless people are people who've never really had boundaries, have never been loved, never been affirmed, and obviously have turned to escapism through substance abuse and have a lot of personality challenges that we've had to try to deal with and work through since they joined our Streetscapes project. And when we got our funding from Afrika Tikkun and through Comic Relief and the support from Afrika Tikkun, they brought in a whole smorgasbord of support for us, and that was through analyzing what we were doing, looking at the different areas of vulnerability our people faced, the risk factors within our Streetscapes project, and also bringing in a formal training program for our staff, for our clients, most importantly, and also for us, providing a chance for our clients of Streetscape to actually join forces with us in looking at what we can do to protect them, to protect the environment they work in, and to protect our staff as well, because our staff also need a lot of protection with people who've been at such great risk for the majority of their lives. And we then had an audit or an assessment done by Afrika Tikkun on Khaleesa, which was then shared with our board. And in that assessment, we had 32 areas that we were assessed on. And I'm afraid at that time our scoring was actually quite low, and evidently a lot of work needed to be done. And in fact, in terms of the assessment, which was based on policies and procedures, safe people, reporting and response, governance and accountability, information and data security, only 13% of the listed practice were in place. And 72% were only partially in place, and 13% were not in place at all. So we got together under the mentorship of Afrika Tikkun and started saying, right, let's put an implementation plan together, and let's start working on this, not only from the perspective of Streetscapes with our homeless people, but looking at Khaleesa as an organization, which is a large organization, and obviously 24 years of reputational capital that we really have to protect. We've also got sister companies in various parts of the world, so we also have to think about that partnership. But most importantly as well is the collaborations that Khaleesa has, because we work in geographic ecosystems with multiple different partners. And when collaboratively working with NGOs, particularly in trying to address the area of vulnerability with our young children and prevention programs and capacity building programs, there's so much that needs to be done in terms of coming to an agreement, how we deal with each other, how we comply with our own policies and our own procedures, and how we safeguard the reputational capital of the collective, where often disputes have arisen and where we've had to look at really take a step back and say, right, this partnership is not working. How do we report on what's gone wrong, and how do we redefine our policies in terms of partnerships? So through what we've had through Afrika Tikkun, we have had a whole world of a whole paradigm shift, and myself having taken over the development of this, and over the past couple of months, I have learned so much. And I just wish I knew all of this when we started off, but I suppose if you don't make mistakes, you don't plant seeds that grow forests. And I would really like to thank Afrika Tikkun for the support you've given us. And we really know that everybody in our country needs to be briefed on safeguarding. We're all responsible for building healthy communities, and at the moment our communities are so desperate. There's so much hopelessness and helplessness, and we've got to protect the well-being of every single person in this country and the well-being of all of our human rights. And this is not a responsibility that's vested with Afrika Tikkun or Khaleesa or our partners. It's each and every South African to pull together to realize that we've got to safeguard our nation, and we've got to pull our children and our communities out of the mire that they're wallowing in at the moment due to the problems that our country is facing. So I would just like to have the motto that let's look at a safeguarded South Africa with all of us holding hands and looking after each other in a cohesive and humane manner. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Liz. And thank you as well for the call to action to say, let's all be safeguarding champions in our communities. You know, it takes a collective. Thank you for that. Thank you, Liz. Again, I just want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, please post them on the chat and I will ask them to Liz, Leslie-Ann and Esley and Karen at the end of their sessions. Karen, if you are ready, over to you.
I think it's Esley next.
Yes, it's Esley. Sorry.
Yes,
Esley?
I'm like, what? It's me next. Thank you.
Yes.
Let me just share my screen quickly. Hi, can you all see my screen?
Yes,
Good.
we can.
This happened to me before where somebody sees my notes and I look at the screen. So you can't see the notes, right?
No, you can't.
Right. Well, thank you very much for your time. I think the perspective that I probably bring to the table is I don't work for an NGO. I work for a normal corporate. So for me, I'm bringing more the perspective of risk management and creating certainty or whatever with policies and procedures. And also just more practical angle in terms of what do you actually need to do with it? So how do you actually do it? Because sometimes you're in charge of a whole function in a business and you're the one, the custodian of that policy, but it's sometimes difficult to know where to start. Even if you Google, I mean, there's a lot of resources available, but I'm just going to tell you some things from my own experience. So I'm an industrial psychologist. I started working for the company that I'm working for now as a business partner. But when I joined the company, there was no HR practices in place. So part of the reason they brought me on board was I needed to implement normal things like performance management, code of conduct, industrial relations, and that sort of thing. So I really had the experience of doing this thing from the bottom up. And I can tell you it is definitely to everyone's best interest if there's clear policies and procedures in place, because it actually protects the employee just as much as it protects the company. In my own experience, I've seen where people have the best intentions, but because there's no clarity on the company's stance on something, sometimes if they use their own discretion in a moment, it actually places the business at risk and it was never the intention. And then obviously the employee is not it doesn't work out well for the employee. So on the agenda, I'm just going to go through the basic definition of a policy and a procedure, why it's important. Why do they remain dormant? Because we have libraries of policy somewhere, but sometimes you can't find it or whatever. We don't even know what the policy says. So why is it that it remains dormant? And what are the possible solutions to help it be a live document, essentially? And then we'll just go through some practical examples of a framework of a policy, a basic outline of a procedure. And then something that we use in our business is called the 1-point lesson for those moments where you can't spend an hour developing or hours developing a proper document, but we'll get to that. In terms of the basic definition, so policy is just a deliberate system of guidelines to guide the decisions and achieve rational outcomes. So it's literally the statement of intent and it's implemented as a procedure. So it's almost like the blueprint that you're creating for the company. And it's saying that this is what our stance is on this thing, and this is how we see it. This is how we don't see it. This is how we apply it. And you'd be surprised that it actually is quite different from one company to the other, even though everybody would have the same policies. How it is formulated differs. And why it differs is it should actually be aligned with your company's overall vision, mission, goals, and values specifically. So good policy would have all of that integrated, because that's now saying this is our stance on this aspect. Then the procedure is literally the step-by-step guide in terms of how it's executed by a person in the business. A policy, you don't really execute it per se, because it gives you the frames and the rules around things, but the way it's executed is through a procedure. So it's literally the established or official way of doing something in the business in a very simply put way. So why is it important to have policies and procedures in place? So it provides clarity, it literally provides clarity in terms of how the business views something, which is quite important. So when I started in industrial psychology, I always viewed the organization as a person. That made it a lot easier for me to understand how culture and values and all of those things fit in. So when you think of a policy, it's almost like a person's personal statement to say that this is who I am, this is how I view things, this is what I will tolerate, these are the things I don't tolerate, this is how I view development, this is how I believe we will do fair recruitment and selection. So it's like, if you see it as literally gives you the clarity of how the business stance on things. It also creates a consistent way of performing or behaving in the business, right? So simple example, if the recruitment policy says that you advertise for 5 days, the policy creates that consistent way of performing, and for the business to hold us to account to say, but you didn't advertise for 5 days. Or a policy might say that we will be more lenient on internal candidates than external candidates, right? So it gives us a consistent mandate, even as people in HR, if it's our policies, to make decisions and almost to say no or yes or whatever, because the policy states this is the way that we do it. It also helps create a sense of certainty. If in that, taking away that opportunity for somebody to maybe by accident apply their discretion in an incorrect way, it helps create that sense of certainty, because now people know where we stand with certain things, and they don't have to spend time figuring out, speaking to a number of people, you know, what is the process on this or whatever, it's clear. It also helps with the experience of equality, because the policy applies to everybody equally. So everybody forms under that framework. And if you have a policy in place, it helps to, I would say, reduce some of the favoritism, because the policy is what you hold a person to account. It's not then a personal thing that you're trying to address a manager on. It's quite clear to say, you know, this is our recruitment policy, this is the steps that we follow. In this case, you're trying to bypass the policy, we can't do that. And like if you're an HR, you experience that a lot, where people want to sort of bring in their own people that they know, and then you can just say, well, we will put the person in the pool of CVs, however, as per our policy, this is how we do it. It also helps make people more accountable and take ownership, especially because a policy should clearly state at the end of it the roles and responsibility of the people involved or who the policy pertains to. It also enables managers to hold others to account. So there, in industrial relations, there's like 3 basic questions that you have to answer in good conscience before you can ever take action against somebody that's breached the policy, or you know, you want to find guilty of misconduct possibly, is there a rule? And this is the thing, when I started at BAD, that really was the most challenging concept to get across to managers, is you cannot hold somebody accountable if there isn't a clear rule in place. Okay, so I can't, because I feel it's unfair for somebody to choose their brother over another candidate, right? Let's say it's nepotism. And then I want to now address my HR administrator about her selection process, but what am I basing it on? I can't, if I don't have a policy, I don't actually have the mandate to hold the person to account. So is there a rule? Is the person aware of the rule? And that's the other thing. It is quite a tedious thing, but you're so happy if you put this thing in place. Is the person aware of the rule? Have you communicated it? Is it part of your induction so that it's like reasonable to expect that the person is aware of the rule, or that they sign it off as part of an employee handbook or whatever the scenario is? And then did they break the rule? So Did they break the rules? Usually the reason the people come to you with a industrial relations issue, but then you have to go back and say, is there a rule? Is there really a clear rule that has been consistently applied? Is it documented? Is it like that is really the company's stance? And if so, can we really prove that the person is aware of it? So that's really what I've learned over the years at Barron of why it's important to have policies and procedures in place. Then we have, why does it remain dormant? And this is like one of the things with COVID that hit last year, we took that as an opportunity to rewrite all of our policies. And I tell you, this is even my challenge. And so the advice that I'm going to give you guys is even the advice I give to myself, right? So the first thing that I realized why policies remain dormant is accessibility. There might not actually be a central point where anybody can just log on and access a policy. Maybe you have a learning management system and it's there. Maybe you issue everybody with a manual employee handbook or something when they start, but they lose those things. So even for managers, if they can't access it, like the one thing that I've learned is like human nature is convenience, right? So if you're making it a little bit of an obstacle to get to information, you can be sure that nobody's going to look at it. The other one is lack of awareness, where managers aren't properly trained on the policies, and so they won't actually be able to use it effectively. And this is definitely one of the feedbacks that I give to myself is as soon as somebody's promoted into a leadership position, it should be key that one of their orientation or training sessions should be around the company policies. Because remember, as soon as you become a manager or in charge of other people in the business, you act as an agent of the organization. So you need to know the policies and procedures off by heart because you're making decisions within that framework. So that's one of the reasons that I've seen it hasn't been applied consistently. Then user friendliness. Policies are often written and it feels like you need to have some law degree to actually understand what they're saying. And it's always like these very long documents, like, I don't know, even for me, I get bored by policies and like, I really have to invest some time to go and read it because it's very formal and you actually have to have some level of English comprehension to understand it the first time around. Relevance. So sometimes a policy is a tick box exercise. So it's not actually aligned with the company vision, mission, values and goals. So it's like literally something off the shelf. They just change the company details. Now we have it. So when somebody audits us, there's our policy, right? But I've seen the policies that actually gain traction in the business is one where you weave in the company's or the organization's vision and values. And and I'll show you an example just now, but just sort of setting the scene within that framework. Then also lack of consequence. So maybe there's just no consequence for if a manager actually doesn't apply the policy. I've seen if there's a consequence loop that's broken, a policy won't be applied. And also if there's like policies that have a penalty to it, like if it's a high risk if this thing goes wrong, those are usually applied. So that's what I also mean with the lack of consequence. So if it's like, SARS won't, we won't get a penalty from tax if we don't follow this policy, then people won't follow it. But as soon as there's like some penalty that the company needs to pay, or the Department of Labor can close your factory floor because these things aren't in place, then that policy is definitely followed. Then also lack of buy-in. So what I've noticed, usually when a person writes a policy, and I'm guilty of that, is you sort of make the decision of how you see this play out, but you actually don't do a sense check. So in qualitative research, we call this member checking, right? Actually chatting with people, especially if you write like a development policy or a maternity leave policy, something, like a benefit to the employees. Like we rarely actually ask employees, what is it that they want? Right? And then take that back to leadership and say, can we bring this in as a policy? And then if, there's an alignment between what employees actually want to be in the policy and the leadership agrees, everybody will know that policy, right? The employees will even make sure that they know that policy because they were part of that process of developing it. So that's my reasons for why it remains dormant. Possible solutions, so for accessibility, share drive, a Google account, even a hard copy. We have something called ESS, so employee self-service, where people can view their pay slips and whatever, and we've even loaded it there. All I would recommend is, like, if you do have a one-point access, you just have to make people aware of where it is, especially like maybe part of the induction to say, oh, this is where you get all the company policies. The lack of awareness on the policies, what we've seen works is as soon as the person gets inducted, we literally talk through I think it's the top 5, like ethics, time and attendance, remuneration, health and safety, code of conduct. Another one I didn't mention here is a development policy, because you don't also want to bombard every employee with every single policy in your business. You actually need to go and identify who is this relevant to. For example, if I can't claim money for travel, right, it's not part of my job, then I shouldn't have to read the policy on travel allowances. It's just not necessary. So that's also probably a way to get buy-in. Then training for new supervisors and managers. As soon as somebody gets promoted, get them orientated on the policies, and it can be done in a fun way. They can read it and present it back, or however, but they should definitely be onboarded with it. And then quarterly refresher campaigns. So the lack of awareness, and I think I put it with the user friendliness, is like, what I've seen helps is if you just translate that policy into a user-friendly infographic that's a little bit fun. People understand in pictures a lot better than words. So that's definitely a thing that I would recommend, especially if you have like a nice creative person in marketing that can help you out. Then create one-point lessons, and I will show you an example of a one-point lesson because it just makes it understandable, because a one-point lesson only has 1 point to it. It's not a whole document. It's like, I just want to get this point across. And then also using practical examples to illustrate how it plays out. So with supervisor and manager training is actually to give them the opportunity to say, bring us your examples. As we train you on the policy, give us your questions and whatever, and we actually play it out and we see how we apply the policy. Relevance, like I mentioned, you have to actually sort the policies according to who needs to be aware of it, because if you have policies, it's always a good idea to have like one Excel document that has the list of all your policies, who the custodian is and when last it was reviewed. And I would say it would be good to add a column there to say, who's the audience? Is this for all employees? Is this for managers? Is this just for operational employees? That sort of thing, so that you know, so you can cater the policy training according to that. Review and update policies annually. This is quite an important one, I think, because that's how you keep it alive, is if somebody, one person is responsible and the custodian of that policy, and they have to review it maybe annually or every second year. Then also roles and responsibilities and policies. What I've seen with smaller companies, I also help out with SMME development, but what I've seen with smaller companies is their policies always refers to people in the document. And then as soon as the person leaves, the policy is not updated. It's just a better way to always keep it to position. And then also to make sure that the policy speaks to the vision, mission, values, and goals of the organization. Because that's even how you inspire people with the document, is if they can read and they see there's like a vision with the thing. It's not just a set of rules, you know? So here is the practical example of a basic framework of a policy. This is not the only way, but this is sort of the structure that I found helps me whenever I have to write a policy. You always start with the heading. So obviously, I just wanted to see if I have a laser now. Anyway, so your heading document, and you can make it look any way that you want. I don't know what sort of auditing happens with NGOs, but like we do annual audits, and one of the things is, what is it? ISO 9001 or whatever. So they always look for like a naming convention. So before you just name things whichever way, it's important to have like some logic around it. For us, we always just use, it's almost like an acronym essentially, like employee development, so it'll be ED1. Okay. To name the policy, to have the date when the policy was written, how many pages. This is just sort of administrative things, but that's always important. Then the policy brief and the purpose. And this is how you'll see we integrate the vision of the company, right? This is our example. So we say that the employment development policy has been developed in line with our overall vision and strategy of becoming a brandable solutions leader in Africa. Already when you read that, you feel a little bit inspired, I hope. In our pursuit of this vision, we strive to becoming a learning organization, right, that enables our employees to become agile and adjust to the demands of the changing nature of work, equipping our employees of opportunities to learn, and so on and so on. So the policy brief and purpose is literally, why does this policy exist, right? Then
Ashley, you have 2 minutes left.
Sorry, oh my goodness. Okay, so I'll share the things. I actually want to get to the 1-point lesson, sorry. But I will share my thing. So this is just the outline of a procedure, because like we mentioned, the policy is the company statement and the procedure is literally like tidbits of your policy and how it is applied by people in the business. So this is just a quick one of how it looks like. What I wanted to get to is the 1-point lesson, because these things don't disappear. But anyway, so the 1-point lesson, the purpose is for literally those situations where you can't actually have a procedure for every single thing in place, or you don't have time to build a procedure immediately, but you need to nip this thing in the butt. And I'll give you guys this as well. It's just a template. This is, for example, we found that employees were using blades to clean garments instead of a picking thing. So you just want to get 1 point across, because to take them through our whole health and safety policy and procedure is not going to make them change necessarily, but we find with the 1-point lesson, it helps. So the first point that you make is what it should not look like. And then the second point that you make is what it should look like. And if you can add pictures to the thing, even better. So hopefully through today, you can see that, you have your policy, you have your procedures, but then you also have the option of a 1-point lesson if you need to nip something in the bud quickly and just create clarity on something. So, sorry, that is my presentation. I'll share it with the people that want to see the structure of a policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ashley. And your presentation is so valuable, because we're always just talking about how it's important to have a policy, but the truth is almost everyone doesn't know where to start. So thank you for showing us that. And also the other day we were actually talking with Leslie Ann as well, to say the 1-point aspect of it is also very important, because when do you get into detail and when do you not get into detail, and sometimes you don't have time to get into a lot of details about that. So thank you for that. Esley's presentation, together with everyone's presentation, will be shared with you. At the end of this, and then don't forget to post your questions and she will also respond to them. Okay, and our next and last speaker is Karen. Karen, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to share my screen. So my presentation leads nicely on from both Leslie Ann and Esley. It's almost like we planned it. So I'm looking, yes, we have policies, but actually I always say to people, in terms of safeguarding, the policy doesn't keep people safe. It only keeps people safe if it's put into practice. So how do you put policies into practice? And I'm coming at it from a perspective of a donor. So I met Afrika Tikkun when I was working at Comic Relief, and set up the support that Afrika Tikkun has given to Comic Relief partners in South Africa. And Leslie Ann was very complimentary about Comic Relief and the support they got, and that's great, and I'm really pleased to hear it. Unfortunately, people's experiences of donor approaches to policies and safeguardings is not always so positive. And so I want to talk about how you navigate donor requirements in a way that helps you strengthen your safe practices and not just strengthen your policies. So the issue of funders and safeguarding only really came to the fore in 2018. So previously, donor organisations used to be, well, we just write the check. Why do we need to think about keeping people safe? Because we never have any contact with communities. Then there was all the big scandal in the UK. It was Save the Children and Oxfam. In South Africa, you had equal education. In other parts of the world, you had other things. And there was a big inquiry in the UK that looked into, well, what's happened over the last 10 years? Because in 2002, 16 years before, we'd had the same scandal in West Africa about abuse occurring there. And lots of things had happened, but obviously it wasn't working. And this inquiry found that lots of people across the sector had created policies, but they'd never been properly implemented. So exactly what Esley was talking about policies remaining dormant. And what the inquiry said is safeguarding policies and procedures will be utterly meaningless unless you're looking at the culture of the organisation, and it speaks to the mission and values and the way the organisation functions. It didn't limit its criticism to delivery to NGOs. It was actually really critical of funders, and it was saying that organisations have tried to develop safeguarding measures, but they've never been adequately funded. So you can probably develop a policy quite cheaply, but actually implementing that and changing the way that you work has costs associated, and funders weren't stepping up and providing the funding that was required. And so as a sector, what the inquiry was saying is that we need to do more to make sure that what exists on paper is reflected in practice. So as part of that, I was then at Comic Relief. We got together with Oak Foundation, Porticus, National Lottery Community Foundation and Global Fund for Children to see what we could do to contribute to a positive change. And we created the Funder Safeguarding Collaborative, and our aim is to promote collaboration, listening and learning between funders and the organisations they fund to support and strengthen safeguarding practices globally. So before we launched the collaborative back in March, and before we launched it, we wanted to do a study. We wanted to have an evidence base to shape the work that we do. So it was like, well, what are the challenges in terms of how funders approach safeguarding? The first was unclear expectations. Like we're here talking in the first video, there's PSEAH, there is safeguarding, there's child protection. What are you supposed to do? What policy are you supposed to have, and what measures are you supposed to put in place? It's really unclear. And actually, for small organisations, the expectations can seem unrealistic and overwhelming. And what we were seeing a lot of is donor-led compliance. So I think Esley referred to this as well. You have a policy because your funder wants you to have a policy. It's not actually, it's something you can trot out when you apply for funding, but it's not actually about you and your organisation and making it safer. And people didn't feel confident that funders had the right expertise. So in terms of what we're trying to do, we want to make sure that funders are much clearer, in communicating that they're clearer in communicating their expectations.
Okay, I think let's just give Karen a minute to be okay. And then in the meanwhile, Karen, are you okay, or can I ask a question while you, okay.
Ask a question, that would be helpful, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, Leslie-Ann, are you still with us?
I am indeed.
Great, thank you, Les. Leslie-Ann, there was a question here for you. I think what was asked was that A, what would you say have been the greatest challenges around implementing policies in your organization, and what did you learn from these challenges?
So the greatest challenge is CALISA is a very complex organization in that we work in geographic ecosystems with multiple stakeholders, and everything we do is based on consultation with the community. So we believe that the communities are the custodians of the solutions to their own problems. They know what needs to be done and they know where their resources lie, except they don't have the support to uplift people in order to address their local needs. So the challenge that we've had around policies has really been looking at a multiple sectoral point of view, is looking at how you interweave policies together systemically in geographic ecosystems with many, many different stakeholders coming in and playing different roles, albeit in aligned ways. Now, how do you coordinate, how do you manage, and how do you make sure that expectations are met without conflictual issues arising, which is always very, very difficult. I think your video actually made reference to that, is why does this NGO get funding and not the other one?
Yeah.
And what have I learned from it? I learned from it is consultation. You cannot do anything without engaging and asking questions. And I always say that, I might have a lot of knowledge of what I've done, but I haven't lived the lives that the people that we are serving live. So they are the ones that need to give us the advice around how best to craft our policies.
Okay, thank you, Les. And then your second question was, what did you recommend other organizations do so that they can learn from your experiences? I think you just partly answered that question in terms of consulting with one another. But is there anything else that you... Yes, please go ahead, Leslie.
I think though, there's so much naivety and ignorance in the NGO sector, especially amongst fledgling NGOs around policies and the lack of adherence and consequences thereof if they are not followed. So there is a huge body of work that has to be done at grassroots level with small NGOs who are really, they're there with their passion and their pension money. And we've got to start inculcating this at that grassroots level if we're ever going to really have cohesion in the sector.
All right, thank you, Les. Les, we still have a few more questions for you, but I will just move on to Esli. Esli, I have a lot of people just asking me directly, do you offer trainings for other organizations in terms of how to practically draft policies and so forth?
Oopsie, sorry. I was supposed to press my unmute button. Well, it's not something I've considered yet, but I'm open to considering things like that. So, yeah, share the details with me later on. I don't mind.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Esli. And the other question is, you spoke about reviewing policies annually, and then you also spoke about quarterly refresher campaigns. So as the policies are reviewed, is it important to retrain or re-induct staff all over again and not just new staff?
Yeah, so that's actually vitally important to that second question. So if remember the first one that you have to ask yourself is there a rule in place? And the second one is the person aware, or is it reasonable to expect that the person is aware? So every time there's a change, you can do a communication campaign around the change and an infographic, and then attach the actual policy for people to review. But I think the quarterly, it's not quarterly for all the policies. It's maybe a quarterly campaign on one policy. I mean, we've rolled it out recently with our whistleblowing hotline, and then we have sexual harassment, and then we have recruitment policy. It's just something to keep it in front of mind for people.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Esli. And then one last question for you, and then we can move on to Karen if she's ready. Is Esli, do you suggest any additional steps or more focus on any particular steps or rematch the policy or culture in the organization? So for example, in addition to the policy, are there any additional steps that you think need to be taken? You already spoke about the refresher campaigns. Is there anything else that you can think of that needs to be, that also needs to be reintroduced or taken within the organization?
Yeah, I think my suggestion would be a step back, right? So it's like when you do, to make sure that the policies are developed aligned with the vision, mission, and values. So that's back. And then like I mentioned, just communication campaigns and like part of induction or onboarding training. And you can even like the managers on an annual basis, like a refresher. And if they don't, get the 70 or the 80% on the policy questions, they have to redo the induction part. Yeah. But you definitely need resources for that, like probably like a proper training coordinator in place to be able to do that effectively. But yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Esty. Thank you, Leslie. We still have more questions for you, but I think Karen is ready. Karen, over to you. Okay. Okay, great. Thanks, Karen.
I think you're muted, Karen. I can't hear you.
Thank you for your patience. Now I've stopped coughing, there's no drilling in the background, so I apologise for that. So when funders are asking organisations to develop policies, but also practices, we want to make sure that the communication is clear, that the expectations are realistic, and that's realistic for organisations of different sizes and capacities. So organisations, big international organisations working over many countries need to be safe, but so do small community groups who are working and interacting with communities. And part of that is that whatever is created needs to be owned by the organisation. It's not something that you produce for your funder. It's something that you produce for your organisation and that you use to strengthen the work that you're doing. And we need to make sure that the funders who are talking to their grantees about this are educated and informed and can help and support in a useful way. So I'm going to talk about two areas that are particularly problematic. So the first is assessment. So when you're applying for funding and a donor asks you to explain your they assess you for safeguarding, and if you don't have the right policies and procedures in place, you're not going to get the funding. And then we're going to talk about monitoring and support once the funding is in place. So there's a number of challenges that we've found. So first of all, funders have used different terminology. Some talk about protection, some talk about safeguarding, some talk about child protection, PSEAH. And so organisations, NGOs are unclear about what's expected of them. And sometimes the approach is, it's like a tick box approach. You either have the policy or you don't. And if you don't, then you don't get the money. And what this has led to is NGOs creating policies, a mountain of policies, in order to be compliant with donor demands. So I've seen organisations who have a child protection policy, a safeguarding policy, a PSEH policy, a dignity at work policy, discrimination policy. They've got so many policies and they all say slightly different things. And if you're a worker, that clarity that Esli was talking about isn't there, because depending on which policy you read, it tells you to do something different. So that's really problematic in terms of implementation. The other issue is organisations read the requirements, go, I need a policy. So they go onto a website, because there's loads of examples of safeguarding policies. They download it, and they change the name. Now that may tick the box for the donor. It doesn't do anything to make your organization safer. At the other side is smaller organizations in particular can go, actually, this is completely unrealistic. I can't do it. We don't have enough staff. We're not going to apply for the funding. So you have really amazing organizations who miss out on funding, and actually they probably have positive, safe practices, but they just don't have the policies. So it's creating that link between your policy and your practice. So 3 things that we're trying to push with our funding organizations. First is clear communication. So we're pushing our members, we have around 50 funders as members of the collaborative, to publish what they expect around safeguarding on their websites. And because what we've heard is that actually funders providing information about what safeguarding is and the different elements to think about can actually be really useful for the organizations who are trying to strengthen their practice. So organizations can go on to funder websites and go, okay, these are the kind of things I should be looking at. So you don't have to do it quickly when you're applying for funding. You can think about it in advance. And that what is listed there isn't just what policies to have, but actually the practices that those policies should be looking at. We're very much, when looking for policies, is if I'm looking at a policy, when I read it, I want to be able to tell who you are and what you do. So yes, there's the introduction that Esley spoke about around the context of the organisation, but actually for safeguarding, what is contained in your policies and the procedures should tell me immediately what you do. So if you run groups for mothers and babies, you should have some clear safeguards around mothers and babies. If you take children on a summer camp, you should have clear safeguards for taking children away on camp. There's certain things that will be in every policy, like safe recruitment practices, reporting procedures, but everything else should be tailored to who you are and what you do. And increasingly, rather than just asking for policies, what funders are doing is they want to talk to people to say to your field staff or your board members or your managers, tell me what you do in terms of safeguarding. Because if people don't know about the policy and don't understand it, it's not having a positive impact. We're encouraging donors to recognise safeguarding as a journey. So once you've developed your policy, actually it's going to take a while to implement, and it's something that you will constantly be reviewing and learning more. And Leslie spoke about that. Something goes wrong and you go, oh, what could we have done? And that's where you all the time are strengthening your safeguarding. And that's why the annual policy review is so important, because you'll be learning all the time, and it's important to capture that in your policies and procedures. But it does take time and resources, whether it's for your staff, whether it's for training, whether it's for travel. And so really encourage you to include safeguarding in your budgets when you apply to funders, because it has an associated cost. And then we're working with funders in terms of making sure they're appropriately trained, but also that they listen to organisations and learn from them, because actually they're the experts in what works and what doesn't. So my top 5 tips for navigating funder policy requirements around safeguarding is have a look on donor websites and see what they're saying is good practice, because that will help you think through the different aspects of safeguarding. Think about what you already do and start to document that, because it's much better to start with what you're doing well. Like Leslie spoke about only having 13% in place. That can be really overwhelming when you think, but there's another 87% that we're not doing. But actually, if you focus on what you're doing well, that gives you a really good foundation to build on. Look at your existing policies and cross-reference them with your safeguarding policy. So you may already have safe recruitment practices in your HR policies. You may do interviews and references. You may already do things but they're in different policies. So just cross-reference them, say in your safeguarding policy, and say, and look here, and you'll find more information on that. Acknowledge your gaps and develop a plan. It is a journey, so you don't have to do it all at once. And if you go to a funder, we know we've got this, but we've got more work to do here, and this is our plan. I think they'll really respect that. And include safeguarding in your budget and your timeline. So once you've got the money, you've got through the assessment stage, what then happens next? So similar problems. Funders tend to put their expectations around safeguarding into funding agreements, but who reads the funding agreements? Probably your director or your fundraising manager. And the funding agreements often focus on policy rather than practice. Again, unrealistic timescales. You've got to develop your policy before you get your first payment, and there's no resources to help you to do that. Grant managers are often worried about talking about safeguarding, so they don't talk about it. It kind of finishes with the policy. And again, that kind of feeds into policy compliance, because organisations, I really respect Leslie Ann for being so open about some of the challenges Kulisa has had. Often organisations are really fearful of saying to their funders, we're finding this difficult, we don't have enough time or resources, because they're worried that the funder will withdraw money. But actually, those challenges are real. And if you're to overcome them, you need to have time and support to be able to do that. So the positive practices that we're pushing our members to look at is for funders and the organisations they fund to frame safeguarding as part of their mission and essential to having a positive impact. So safeguarding isn't something that is separate from everything else that you do. In order for your programmes to be successful, they need to be safe. So safeguarding becomes a normal part of the conversation, because actually, if you're doing work and people are getting hurt in the process, you're not being successful in the way that you want to be. Take a strength-based approach. So identify what you do well and build from there. And build an action plan that's tailored to your needs and priorities. So if funders are asking you what support you need, it needs to be not the same plan for everybody that they're funding, but something that's specific to you. Again, recognising safeguarding as a journey that takes time. And what we're saying to our network members, our funders, is the plan we need to be working towards stronger safeguarding in incremental changes with milestones that, one, you can celebrate success, celebrate what you've achieved, but recognise sometimes those milestones might need to move and shift because you have 100 different priorities to juggle all at once. So it's about being realistic and flexible. And then with funder knowledge, it's again important that funders listen and learn to the organisations they're working with. But actually, increasingly, what we've seen is that organisations find it much more useful to talk to other organisations who are going through the same thing. So looking for opportunities for peer-to-peer knowledge and sharing of experience. And I know that's something that Afrika Tikkun do a lot of, and that's really, really helpful. So my top 5 tips once the funding's in place. Think about safeguarding as integral to your programme. Don't silo it off. Don't have it as something separate. In any conversation in what you're doing, there should always be a question of what are we doing to make sure that this activity or this service is safe? That's what safeguarding is, asking that question in everything that you do. Develop a plan and identify priorities, but be realistic about that and be open to shifting and changing those as you go along. Things don't always go to plan. Talk to your grant manager. I worked at Comic Relief. I now work with around 50 different funders. Actually, they will be much more sympathetic if you talk about the challenges and are open about it and work with them to get the support that you need, than you try and hide it and then everything goes wrong. Take your time and discuss challenges, which leads on from that, and ask for support. So ask for support. We at Comic Relief, not only would we provide support through organisations like Afrika Tikkun, if organisations were trying to strengthen their safeguarding, sometimes we would change their project milestones, we would change the target number of beneficiaries so that it was more realistic that they could do safeguarding on top of the delivery of their programme. So just wanted to share a story of a typical funder safeguarding journey. So this is one of the members of the Funder Safeguarding Collaborative. So in 2016, they started off and they had no safeguarding requirements. Safeguarding is something that's out there, we don't need to worry about it. 2018 came and they went, oh, okay, we're a funder, but we do need to think about safeguarding. So they developed their own safeguarding policy and started saying to all of their grantees, you need to have a safeguarding policy too. But over the first 2 years of implementing it, what they found is that because they said you need to have a safeguarding policy, their grantees started to see the policy as the goal in itself. So it's like, we've created a policy, here you go, we've done what we need to do on safeguarding, where actually the policy is a tool to strengthen practice. So it's like, how do we move away from the policy being the goal? Because it's actually not getting us where we want to be. So we've just done a review together, and what we've spoken about is about accompanying the grantees on a journey to document safe practices. So we've actually taken the whole word policy out of it because organisations particularly small organisations, really struggled with the idea of having lots of policies and procedures. It is, as Leslie said, it's really important to have things documented for consistency and for clarity, but you can call it whatever you want. So it's a process of documenting safe practices and strengthening those as you go along. With the aim that at some point in the future, and the time frame for different organisations will be completely different, with the aim that over time you are embedding a safeguarding culture within your organisation. Yes, you have a policy, but actually it's just part of what you do. So at Comic Relief, I had the best sign that I had that we were moving towards a safeguarding culture was somebody said to me, you know, it's really strange. We never used to talk about safeguarding. And then in every conversation we have, it comes up somewhere. Somebody says, and you know, have we thought about safeguarding? It came up in the finance team, it came up in the HR team, it came up in the grants team, in the filming team. That's when you're getting to the point that you've got a safeguarding culture, is when people talk about it all the time and they are supported in what they do in implementing that by referring to the policies that you have. Thank you very much, and thank you for putting up with me coughing in the middle.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Karen. And thank you. This was so helpful just to know everything from the funders' perspective. So we are now getting into the Q&A. If you do have any questions, if you could please give them to me, post them on the chat and I'll ask. Les, I will start with you again. There is a question here on, you spoke about the importance of co-creation, basically involving the other staff members when creating the policy. Can you give us an example of how you have done that in your organization? And I'm just going to ask everyone questions, and if you could just please answer. Les, your next question is, do you find that there is a difference between how safeguarding is experienced by grassroots people, as in people on the ground, and how people in the office experience policies and procedures and experience safeguarding concerns? So I will say that again. Do you find that there is a difference between how safeguarding is experienced by grassroots people or people on the ground versus how it is experienced by people in the office?
Okay, super. Thank you. So the example of the co-creation, what we have, our recent exercise, and has been most enlightening for me, is we sent our semi-final policy to all the regional coordinators with a questionnaire, and asked them to complete it, the question in terms of which of the policies they found most useful, which ones they wanted to more training on, which ones they'd be more comfortable to present on, which ones were most relevant to them. And then besides all the staff members in the regions completing that questionnaire, we're now doing an analysis across the country to find out where the needs are and where the help has been, and where we can get staff members to actually present on our behalf in future, where they feel most comfortable with. And across the board, it's been around the safeguarding of children, because our diversion programs are such a huge part of our work. But then also what we're doing on Friday is we are actually, each of our staff members are given a section of the policy to present a PowerPoint presentation on, and they're going to be presenting and creating our consolidated PowerPoint presentation based on each of their analysis and unpacking of the actual policy itself. And that's what we'll be using for induction moving forward. So we're very excited that we'll have Afrika Tikkun as part of our panel to assess how the staff have interpreted the policy and how they are endeavoring to communicate it to our target audiences. The second question around the grassroots in office, it is chalk and cheese. We must remember, dealing at grassroots level, there are thousands of NGOs who are doing the work that because nobody else is there to do it. They're doing it out of authentic passion and real purpose. But there has been no formal induction or training. They're doing it. They're feeding people. They're helping people out. They're looking after the elderly. And it's a desperation matter, and I'm not saying all of them. I'm saying the grassroots ones is the need to sit down and get together and to brainstorm with them about what matters to us and what can we do to standardize our procedures is really important. So you can't draw a comparison between the office and the grassroots level community at all. In fact, we're having a webinar ourselves in a couple of weeks' time where we're talking about during International Week of Restorative Justice, where we're going to be presenting on the findings, trying to make sense of the post-looting mayhem in Alex after our midwinter crisis, and where we're going to be looking at the challenges after 14 group discussions on what the community told us that they need in order to start creating or giving them the power in their hands to start creating their own safeguarding to avoid the community taking the rule into their own hands. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Liz. Karen, over to you. I have 3 questions for you, Karen. The first one is, and I think you partly answered that, is that you said there that organizations need to be free to take their own pace. But have you found that donors are indeed more patient with this? Because people just tend to fear that if they are honest with their procedures or their process, then there's a risk of losing funding. So from your perspective, have you found that funders are more open and patient with allowing organizations to do things at their own pace? That's the first one. The second one is, what are some of the practical examples of the challenges and dangers of organizations doing policies just for compliance and not necessarily to change their culture? And your last question is, from a practical point of view, how do you ensure that the knowledge, experience, and expertise of the grantee organization are taken up, prioritized by funding organizations, and given the credence that they deserve? Okay.
You might need to remind me as we go through. So
sure. Yeah, the last question is on our chat as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in terms of donors being patient, I think it varies. Donors just as with NGOs are all different. I think government donors are the least flexible. So if you're getting funding from the European Union, USAID, FCDO in the UK, they probably will have less flexibility. Now, something that's been spoken about a lot, which you can use in the conversation, is proportionality. So that their expectations should be proportional to the level of risk. So, and the size of the organization. So you can push back on government funders, it's much more difficult. If you're getting funding from a trust and foundation like Comic Relief, Oak Foundation, Porticus, others, they do tend to be more flexible. The difficulty is that people are so scared of saying anything to funders that funders don't get the opportunity to be flexible because nobody tells them what the challenges are. So my experience with funders who are part of the collaborative, they want to know that you're doing something and that you've got something in place. So if as a minimum you can document, as I said, document some basic a basic policy which just says this is what we're currently doing to keep people safe, and then you say, and we have a plan which is going to take this amount of time to do the rest, I think most trusts and foundations will completely respect that and be open to it. Practical examples of the problems of compliance. So organizations who have got a safeguarding policy that they've cut and pasted off the internet, they never look at it. Nobody's ever seen it. So how can it keep people safe? You'll talk to people and they don't even know it exists. So if people don't know it exists, it's not doing anything to influence practice at all. So policies, as Lee was saying, policies that are created and then sit on the because what you want is your policy to help people to know what to do and how to do things safely. If they don't know about it and it's just been written for your donor, then it's not going to influence people's practice at all. And then practical, what was the last one? It was about the knowledge of grantees. Sorry, could you just?
Is that how do you ensure that the knowledge, experience, and expertise of the grantee organization is taken up and prioritized by funding organizations?
So again, I mean, we are very much promoting peer-to-peer learning. So saying to funders, you know, you don't get a consultant, don't get somebody like me to go out and train your grantees on safeguarding. Use the knowledge within the organizations that you've got, because actually it is, as you're saying, practical examples, the examples that Leslie Ann has shared, where you go, oh, somebody else has been through this. What did they learn and how did they deal with it? Because it might help me do that. And there's been some good examples of that. So when funders bring organizations together for partner convenings, that they build safeguarding into that, so people can share examples. Or others have created communities of practice or groups where actually grantees meet on a quarterly basis to talk about safeguarding. So it's not somebody coming and telling them this is how you do it, it's them sharing what they're doing in practice. I think the other thing that I would say, which I would encourage donors and to do and grantees to encourage, is funders actually going and visiting the work. Because when you're sat in an office in London or Geneva or New York, it's bits of paper, it's not real people, it's not the reality of the work. And when grant managers and others go and see it, they understand the complexity, they understand the challenges, they understand it better, they don't fully understand it. But you can then talk about your work in a holistic way, and safeguarding becomes something that's real rather than just a piece of paper. And your expertise in managing this complex environment and these complex needs suddenly becomes really clear. So if you can have any opportunity to get people to come and see what you do, I think that makes a huge difference.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Karen. And thank you to everyone else. We're nearing the end of our webinar. I can see that we do not have any questions. I just want to give people one more chance. Does anyone have any other question? Okay, So then if that's not the case, just thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for bearing with us through load shedding. If you are here and you got the link from a colleague or a friend and you did not register, I provided the link on the chat that we're able to send you some of the presentation, for example, like Aisley's presentation that has the practical steps and some of the links to the work that we've done. There are some who have requested the recording. Please do register so that you do get the recording if you were having problems just accessing everything. And then lastly, like I said, this is a 5-day webinar series. Please do join us tomorrow. Our topic for tomorrow is self and collective care in a time of collective trauma and burnout. I think we have just been through so much in the last few months or the last year and more because of COVID and all of that. So we have all been going through some collective trauma. In all of the work that we're doing, whether corporate or NGO or government, we've also been going through burnout. And tomorrow really is just about how to take care of ourselves and how to take care of each other during this time. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining, and see you tomorrow.